The Odyssey, a sleepy summary for drifting gently off to sea. Long, long ago, so long ago that the very stars were younger and the wine-dark sea had not yet grown tired of sailors, there lived a man named Odysseus, and he was, by every account, the cleverest man in the whole of the ancient world. He was not the tallest hero, nor the strongest, nor the most beautiful to look upon. But he was cunning in the way that water is cunning, always finding the lowest path, always getting through. He was a king, you see, king of a small rocky island called Ithaca, which sat in the sparkling western seas like a sun-warmed pebble in a bowl. It was not much of an island, all steep hills and goat paths and olive trees, but Odysseus loved it with the fierce, particular love that wanderers feel for home. He had a wife there, gentle and impossibly faithful Penelope, with her dark hair and her patient hands always busy at the loom. He had a young son, Telemachus, who had been only a baby when Odysseus sailed away. He had an old father, Laertes, bent now over his garden rose like a question mark. He had old servants who remembered him. He had, in short, everything worth returning to. The trouble was that he had gone to war. Not because he wanted to. The old stories hint that Odysseus tried every trick in his bottomless bag to avoid going, but because a beautiful woman named Helen had left her husband, the Spartan king Menelaus, and sailed away to Troy with a Trojan prince named Paris, and all the kings of Greece were honor-bound to bring her back. So the great fleet assembled, 1,000 ships or something close to it, black-hulled and wind-filled, and among them sailed Odysseus, already homesick before the mainland had even vanished behind him. The war itself, the long, grinding siege of the walled city of Troy, lasted 10 years. 10 years of camping on a foreign beach, of fighting and burning and waiting. Odysseus distinguished himself in cleverness, if not always in glory. It was his idea at the end to build the famous wooden horse, that hollow gift of apparent surrender stuffed with armored Greeks who crept out at midnight and opened the city gates. Troy fell. Helen was brought home. The kings and heroes made their thankful offerings to the gods and pointed their ships toward Greece. But Odysseus did not go home. Or rather, he tried to go home, and the going took him 10 more years. 20 years away from Ithaca. 20 years of strange islands, angry gods, monsters, witches, shipwrecks, and heartbreak. This is that story. Pull your blanket up. Let the waves come. We begin, in the way of ancient storytellers who like to drop you into the middle of things, not at the beginning, but with Odysseus already gone for 19 years, stranded on a lovely island called Ogygia. Ogygia is the kind of place that ought to be paradise: soft green meadows, sweet-watered springs, grapevines trailing over sea caves, and it is the home of a goddess named Calypso. Meanwhile, and this is the lovely thing about the Odyssey, it runs on meanwhile, back in Ithaca, things have gone badly wrong. Odysseus has been gone so long that everyone assumes he is dead. His house has been invaded. Not by soldiers, but by suitors. A loud, greedy, wine-soaked herd of young men from Ithaca and the surrounding islands, all of them convinced that Penelope must soon choose a new husband from among them, all of them eating Odysseus's food and drinking his wine and sprawling in his halls and hunting his livestock into extinction while they wait for her answer. The gods are watching all of this from Olympus, as the gods always are. Most of them have some opinion about Odysseus. Athene, the grey-eyed goddess of wisdom, is particularly fond of him. She appreciates cleverness the way a craftsman appreciates good tools. She has been trying to help him home, but the great god Poseidon hates Odysseus bitterly because Odysseus once blinded Poseidon's son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, and Poseidon has been stirring up storms and troubles ever since. The Odyssey proper begins when Poseidon has briefly left Olympus to visit the distant Ethiopians, and Athene seizes her chance. Athene goes to Ithaca first, disguised as an old family friend named Ments. She finds Telemachus sitting among the suitors, who are lounging and feasting and making noise, and she pulls him aside and plants a seed in him. Your father may still be alive, she tells him. Stop waiting, go look for news of him. Go to the mainland and ask the old kings who sailed home from Troy, Nestor, Menelaus, whether they have heard anything. It is time, she tells him gently, to become the man your father was. Something unfolds in Telemachus like a sail catching wind. He calls an assembly, the first one in 20 years, and stands before the people of Ithaca and protests the suitors' behavior formally and publicly. The suitors mock him. Antinous, their ringleader, is particularly unpleasant about it. But Telemachus holds his ground, and then he quietly arranges a ship, loads it with provisions, and in the dark of night, while the suitors are sleeping off their wine, he slips out of the harbor and sails east. Telemachus visits old King Nestor in his beautiful sandy city of Pylos, sitting on the beach among the old king's enormous family and listening to reminiscences about the war. Nestor tells him that Menelaus and Helen are home in Sparta and sends him south with a son as companion and guide. In the Golden Palace at Sparta, Telemachus meets Menelaus and Helen, and they weep together over the memory of Odysseus, and Menelaus tells him what little he knows. He encountered a sea god called Proteus during his own wandering home, and Proteus told him that Odysseus was alive, stranded on an island with a goddess who would not let him go. It is at least something. Telemachus begins his journey home, carrying a thread of hope. But back in Ithaca, the suitors have decided that Telemachus has become inconvenient. They are plotting to ambush and kill him when he sails back through the island straits. The noose is tightening slowly over the house of Odysseus. Now the poem draws back and shows us what we have been waiting for, shows us Odysseus himself, sitting on the rocks of Ogygia at the edge of the sea, weeping. He weeps every day. He stares at the horizon in the direction of home, and he weeps. Inside the cave, Calypso waits for him, and she is beautiful, and she loves him, and it is no use at all because all he can see is Ithaca. He has been here 7 years. Athene petitions Zeus on Odysseus's behalf. Zeus, agreeable in Poseidon's absence, sends Hermes, quick, laughing, wing-footed Hermes, the messenger god who is as bright as a coin and moves between worlds like smoke, down to Ogygia with a command for Calypso. Let him go. Calypso is furious. She rails against the injustice of male gods keeping female gods from their loves, but she obeys because you obey Zeus. She goes to Odysseus with a complicated face and tells him he is free. He is suspicious. He has been fooled before, but she swears on the river Styx, the oath that even gods cannot break, and he believes her. She gives him bronze tools, and he builds himself a raft, a simple sturdy thing of lashed timbers, and loads it with provisions and the clothes she has made him, and after one last night together, at dawn he sails. "Row as you will," Calypso had told him, standing at the shore with her arms around herself against the sea wind. He had rowed. He sails for 17 days, navigating by the stars the way Calypso taught him, and then Poseidon comes back from the Ethiopians, looks down from Olympus, and sees Odysseus at sea. The rage that rises in the god of the sea is tremendous and cold and old. He raises his trident and stirs up a storm like a lid being ripped off a pot of boiling water. A sea nymph named Leucothea takes pity on him, appears to him in the water as a diving gannet, hands him a veil of magic fabric that will keep him afloat, and Odysseus wraps it around himself and swims. He swims for 2 days. When at last he drags himself ashore on the island of Scheria, he is so exhausted he cannot move. He crawls under a bush between 2 olive trees, pulls dead leaves over himself like a blanket, and sleeps the sleep of the absolutely finished. Nausicaa goes to the riverside with her maidservants to do the laundry, and while it dries they play ball on the beach, laughing, and one girl's throw goes wide and lands near the olive bushes. And from the bushes rises Odysseus, naked, salt-caked, wild-haired, utterly terrifying in appearance, and all the maidservants scatter screaming. Only Nausicaa holds her ground, because Athene has steadied her heart. Odysseus does not touch her or approach too closely. He is too wise for that, but kneels at a distance and speaks to her with the careful, beautiful words he has always had, comparing her to a young palm tree he once saw at Delos, asking for a rag to cover himself and a direction toward the city. Nausicaa, charmed and compassionate, gives him clothing and food, and tells him exactly how to approach her parents' palace and what to say when he gets there. Odysseus walks to the palace. Athene has wrapped him in a mist, so the townspeople do not see him, and slips inside at the moment the Phaeacian nobles are making their evening libations. He crosses the great hall and throws himself at the feet of Queen Arete, clasping her knees in the traditional gesture of supplication, and asks for help to get home. Then he sits down in the ashes by the hearth like a beggar and waits. There is a moment of stunned silence. Then the eldest lord tactfully points out that leaving a suppliant in the ashes is rather bad form, and Alcinous pulls Odysseus up, gives him a proper seat, feeds him, and promises him passage home without even asking who he is. The Phaeacians are that hospitable. The next day there is a great feast and games and a performance by the blind bard Demodocus. And Odysseus weeps when Demodocus sings of the Trojan War, weeps silently into his cloak, and it is Alcinous who notices and gently asks, "Stranger, who are you and what has happened to you?" And so Odysseus takes a breath and begins to tell his story, the great long story within the story, the account of all his wanderings since Troy fell. He will talk for 4 books of poetry, several thousand lines, ranging across 10 years and half the known world. Pull your blanket up tighter. This is where it gets long and strange and wonderful. From Troy, he tells them, his fleet set sail eastward. They stopped first at the land of the Cicons, where they made the mistake of raiding the nearest town, and then, when Odysseus told everyone to sail immediately because the Cicons would certainly call for reinforcements, his men instead sat on the beach getting drunk. The reinforcements arrived in the morning. Many men died. Odysseus sailed on, shaken. Storms battered them south for 9 days, until they reached the land of the lotus eaters, a dreamy, passive people who ate the fruit of the lotus plant and forgot everything, including the desire to go anywhere or do anything. Three of Odysseus's scouts who tasted the lotus immediately forgot about Ithaca, forgot about home, forgot about everything except sitting pleasantly in the sun. Odysseus dragged them back to the ships by force, weeping, and had them tied under the rowing benches until the forgetfulness passed and they were themselves again. He did not try the lotus himself. Odysseus, characteristically curious, decided to investigate one of these caves. The cave was enormous, a great echoing space hung with cheeses and pens full of lambs, and clearly belonged to someone of giant stature. His men begged him to grab some cheese and go. Odysseus wanted to meet the owner. This was a mistake. Polyphemus came home, rolled an enormous stone across the cave mouth that 24 wagons could not have moved, and when he discovered the strangers, he ate 2 of Odysseus's men for supper, just snatched them up and dashed their brains against the floor with the casual efficiency of a man cracking eggs, then went to sleep. In the morning he ate 2 more for breakfast and left, rolling the stone back behind him. Odysseus sat in the dark with the surviving men and the sheep, and thought as fast as he had ever thought in his life. There was a great stake of olive wood in the corner of the cave. Odysseus sharpened it to a point and hardened it in the embers. When Polyphemus returned and ate 2 more men, Odysseus offered him wine, the strong, dark wine they had brought from the ship, undiluted knockout wine, and the Cyclops drank it and asked for more and asked for the stranger's name, in what passed for good humor. Odysseus told him his name was Nobody. Polyphemus found this amusing. He promised that as a guest gift he would eat Nobody last. Then he fell asleep, and Odysseus drove the burning stake into his single eye. The roar that went up was oceanic. The other Cyclopes came to the cave mouth asking who was hurting Polyphemus, and he bellowed, "Nobody, nobody is hurting me." And they shrugged and went away, because if nobody was hurting him, what could they do? Polyphemus rolled back the stone to let his sheep out in the morning, feeling around with his hands for Greeks, and Odysseus tied his men under the bellies of the sheep, tied himself to the great ram, and they escaped into the sunlight hidden beneath the wool. It was perfect. It was foolproof. And then Odysseus, rowing away from the island, could not help himself. He stood in the prow of his ship and shouted back at the blinded Cyclops. It was not Nobody who blinded you, it was Odysseus, son of Laertes of Ithaca. His men begged him to stop. He shouted it again, louder. Polyphemus hurled a chunk of cliff face toward the sound of his voice, and then he prayed to his father Poseidon, let Odysseus never reach home, or if he must, let him arrive late and alone and find only trouble waiting. And Poseidon heard. This is how Odysseus earned the hatred of the sea itself. Aeolus welcomed Odysseus warmly, heard his whole story over a month of feasting, and when the time came to send him home, he tied up all the storm wines in a bag of ox hide and gave it to Odysseus, leaving only a gentle west wind free to push him home. For 9 days they sailed, Odysseus refusing to sleep, holding the bag personally. On the 10th day, with Ithaca so close they could see the smoke from the hearth fires, Odysseus finally fell asleep. His men, certain the bag contained gold Aeolus had given their captain privately, opened it. Every wind tore free at once, and the storm blew them all the way back to Aeolia. Odysseus went back to Aeolus and begged for help again. Aeolus stared at him for a long moment and then told him to leave. Clearly the gods hated this man, he said, and he wanted no part of it. Half of Odysseus's remaining men went to investigate the smoke rising from Circe's clearing. She came out to meet them, gracious and shining, and invited them in, and gave them a meal laced with a potion, and touched them with her wand, and they became pigs. All of them except Eurylochus, who had stayed outside, suspicious of anything that looked this inviting, and who ran back to tell Odysseus. Odysseus went himself, there was nothing else for it, and on the way through the forest Hermes appeared to him and gave him a herb called moly, white-flowered and black-rooted, which would protect him from Circe's magic. He ate the food, he did not transform, and when she touched him with her wand and told him to go to the pigsty, Odysseus drew his sword and put it to her throat. Circe stared at him and then burst into delighted laughter. "You are Odysseus," she said, "the one Hermes always told me would come, the one no potion can touch. Come to bed." He made her swear the oath first, the great oath, the Styx oath, that she would do him no harm. Then he went to bed with her, which is the sort of thing that happened in those days when a man with a sword put it to a goddess's throat, and she found him interesting. She transformed his men back. She was, in fact, a perfectly good host once the initial attempted transformation was out of the way. They stayed on Aea for a year, eating and drinking and being comfortable, until his men shook Odysseus by the shoulders one morning and reminded him that they were trying to get home. Circe told him something no one wants to hear: "You cannot go home yet. You must go first to the land of the dead, the house of Hades, to consult the spirit of the blind prophet Tiresias, who alone among the dead retains his full mind and can tell you the true path home." She told him how to get there. The route required sailing to the edge of the world, to the dark shore where the rivers of the underworld met in mist and grief. Odysseus dug a trench and poured into it libations of milk and honey and wine and water and the blood of 2 black sheep, and the spirits came crowding from the depths, pressing and murmuring. He held them back with his sword until Tiresias came, the old prophet, white-haired even in death, leaning on his golden staff, and drank and spoke clearly. Tiresias told him, "Poseidon's wrath will follow you all the way home. You will find trouble at home when you arrive, but you can still return if," and this was the crucial thing, "when you pass the island of Thrinacia, where the sun god Helios keeps his sacred cattle, you leave those cattle entirely alone. Every ox, every cow, untouched. Do not eat them, do not sacrifice them. Turn your eyes away and sail past. If you do not, you will lose all your men, and you yourself will come home alone and late on a stranger's ship and find your house in disorder." Then the other dead pressed close. His own mother came, Anticlea, who had died of grief, waiting for him, and he wept to see her and tried 3 times to embrace her, and 3 times his arms passed through her like smoke, because the dead have no bodies, only their shapes. She told him about Ithaca. She told him Penelope still waited, still wept, still hoped. She told him his father Laertes had moved out of the palace and lived in the orchards like a laborer, grief-bent and old. She told him she herself had died of longing for him, that it was missing him that killed her, and this is perhaps the heaviest thing anyone says to anyone in this whole long poem. He saw Agamemnon, killed treacherously by his wife and her lover, the moment he arrived home from Troy, still furious and bitter about it, warning Odysseus to trust no woman, which Odysseus received with the mild skepticism of a man who knew Penelope. He saw Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors, who said memorably that he would rather be the lowest serf alive on earth than king of all the dead. He saw the ancient condemned ones, Tantalus reaching eternally for fruit that pulled away from his fingers, Sisyphus pushing his boulder eternally uphill, and then the horror of the numbers pressed in, and he ran back to his ship. Circe sent them on their way with fair winds and careful warnings. She told him the route exactly. First the sirens, then a choice of passages, then the island of the sun's cattle. Odysseus, who absolutely needed to hear the siren's song and absolutely could not trust himself near it, had his men plug their ears with beeswax and bind him to the mast with explicit orders not to untie him no matter what he signaled. When the song came across the water, he screamed and struggled and begged and threatened and signed frantically that they should untie him, and his men, deaf, following orders, just rowed harder until the island was behind them. Then came the passage between Scylla and Charybdis. Circe had told him this too. Odysseus chose to sail close to Scylla because Scylla would take 6 men and the ship would survive, while Charybdis might take everyone. It was the cold arithmetic of command. He watched helpless as Scylla's 6 heads darted down and snatched 6 of his men off the deck, 6 men who had been with him since Troy, and drew them writhing up to the cave. He did not look away. He felt it was the least he could do. They came to the island of Thrinacia. Tiresias's warning rang in Odysseus's ears. He begged his men to sail straight past without landing. They were exhausted, starving, grief-stricken. They begged to rest. He made them swear on the grave oath to leave the sacred cattle alone, and then they went ashore. Then the winds turned against them and pinned them on the island for a month, eating their provisions down to nothing. Then longer, Odysseus slept. His men, hollow with hunger, looked at the fat cattle of Helios grazing on the emerald hills, and then it was Eurylochus who argued for it, killed and ate them. Zeus sent a thunderbolt when they finally sailed. The ship was hit, shattered, every man in the crew killed. Odysseus clung to the broken mast and keel, floating, alone as Tiresias had warned. The sea pushed him back through the strait, and he passed over Charybdis just as it opened, grabbed a fig tree overhanging the whirlpool and clung to it, waiting, and when Charybdis spat the wreckage back up, he dropped onto the keel and paddled with his hands. 9 days. He floated alone on the open sea for 9 days and then washed up on Ogygia, where Calypso found him and took him in. Where we began, Odysseus finishes his story. The great hall of Alcinous is profoundly silent. Then Alcinous nods and tells him, "Tomorrow you go home," and he means it. The Phaeacians load a great ship with gifts, bronzes, gold, fine cloth, and Odysseus climbs aboard and falls asleep before the harbor mouth is even cleared. A deep, dream-free sleep like death. The exhausted sleep of a man who has been traveling for 20 years and can finally let go. The ship crosses the sea in a single night, supernaturally fast, and in the small grey hours before dawn they carry Odysseus ashore on Ithaca still sleeping, lay him gently on the sand with all his gifts around him, and sail away. Poseidon is furious and turns their ship to stone just as it enters Scheria's harbor, but they reach Ithaca. They do. After everything, they reach Ithaca. Odysseus wakes up on a beach shrouded in mist. Athene has wrapped the island in fog so he won't be recognized. And for a moment he thinks he has been deceived, dropped on the wrong island entirely. Then Athene comes to him in the guise of a young shepherd and lets him slowly work out where he is. Then she drops the disguise and stands before him in her own form, tall, grey-eyed, gleaming slightly, the way all gods gleam slightly, and they look at each other with the easy fondness of two very clever people who have been allies for a long time. She tells him what is happening in his house. She disguises him as an ancient, wrinkled beggar, actually transforms him because she can do that, and sends him to find his old swineherd Eumaeus, who lives in a farmstead in the hills, the most loyal servant in all of Ithaca. While Odysseus sits with Eumaeus, Telemachus returns from Sparta. Athene meets him on the beach before he lands and warns him about the suitor's ambush. She has navigated him safely past it and sends him up to Eumaeus's farmstead first. Father and son meet there, and Athene briefly restores Odysseus's true appearance so Telemachus can see who he is talking to. It is an extraordinary scene. Telemachus, who grew up fatherless, and the father who has thought of almost nothing else for 20 years, embracing and weeping and not quite able to stop. Then Odysseus becomes the old beggar again, and they make a plan. The plan is this: Telemachus will go back to the palace and say nothing and act normally. Odysseus will come down later, disguised as a beggar, and enter the hall and observe. They will wait for the right moment and then, together, deal with the suitors. Odysseus says this with the calm confidence of a man who has faced cyclopes and sea monsters and the land of the dead, and 112 loud drunk noblemen seems like a manageable problem by comparison. Telemachus goes ahead to the palace. Odysseus and Eumaeus follow slowly. As they approach the great compound, Odysseus sees lying in the dung heap outside the gate a very old dog, ribs showing, too weak to rise, and he knows the dog. It is Argos, who was a puppy when Odysseus left, who was the finest hunting dog on the island. Argos, who has been waiting 20 years. Argos lifts his head, his ears prick, and he thumps his tail weakly once, twice, and then is still. He has waited as long as he needed to. He dies right there in the dung heap, having seen the one thing he was waiting to see. Odysseus walked past with his face turned away so Eumaeus would not see the tears. He enters the hall as a beggar, moving among the tables and asking the suitors for scraps as beggars do. Most ignore him. One, Antinous, throws a footstool at him. The suitors are not good men. Penelope hears there is a stranger in the hall who claims to have news of Odysseus, and she sends word that she wants to speak with him. Odysseus asks to wait until evening, when the suitors have gone to their beds. Penelope tells the old beggar stranger that tomorrow, after 20 years, she has decided to set the suitors a contest. Whoever can string Odysseus's great bow, a massive compound bow that Odysseus alone could string, and shoot an arrow through the holes in 12 axe heads lined up in a row, that man she will marry. She is not hopeful about the suitor's chances. She is not particularly hoping for a winner, but she has run out of other options. An old nurse, Euryclea, the woman who had nursed Odysseus as an infant, washes the old beggar's feet that night as guest hospitality required. Her hands, moving over his legs, find a scar just above the knee, a scar from a boar's tusk, gotten when Odysseus was young in his grandfather Autolycus's mountains. She knows this scar. She has seen it since he was a boy. She grabs his leg and looks at his face, and her mouth opens. Odysseus claps his hand over her mouth. Not yet. Not a word, she nods, not a word. The contest day arrives. The suitors gather in the great hall, reclining on their benches, laughing and placing bets. Penelope comes down from her rooms with the great bow and quiver, sets them before the suitors. Telemachus tries first and almost strings the bow, but Odysseus catches his eye and he stops. The suitors try, one by one, heating the bow over fire to soften it, rubbing it with fat, straining and grunting, and none of them can even string it. It is a great curved bow of horn, stiff as a century's patience, and it will not bend for any of them. The old beggar asks to try. The suitors are outraged. How dare a beggar even touch it? But Penelope and Telemachus overrule them. Odysseus takes the great bow. He examines it quietly for worm damage, runs his hands along it with the knowledge of long ownership, and then, effortlessly, while the suitors watch in disbelief, strings it, plucks the string. The note it makes is clear and carrying, like a swallow's cry. He picks up an arrow. He shoots it straight through all 12 axe heads. The great hall goes very quiet for a moment. Then Odysseus looks at Telemachus, and Telemachus moves to the door. And Odysseus shrugs off the rags and stands up, and he is not old and he is not bent, and he puts another arrow on the string and shoots Antinous through the throat as he lifts his wine cup. He told them who he was. He did not speak gently about it. What followed was a battle. The suitors scrambled for their weapons, but Telemachus had removed all the spears and swords from the hall the night before, per Odysseus's instructions, and found nothing. Odysseus stood by the great doorway, Telemachus and Eumaeus, and one loyal cowherd beside him, and they shot and fought and drove the suitors through the hall until every last one of them was dead. The hall was full of blood and the smell of bronze. 12 disloyal maidservants were hanged. The traitors among the servants were punished. The hall was cleaned. Odysseus sent for fire and sulfur and purified his house with smoke. Then Eurycleia went upstairs to wake Penelope and tell her, "Your husband is home. He killed all of the suitors. He is in the hall." Penelope came downstairs and sat across from Odysseus in silence for a long time. She did not throw herself at him. He was a stranger to her, at least to her eyes. 20 years of sun and sea had aged him, and she had been tricked before by hope, and she would not be tricked again. She sat and looked at him, and he sat and looked at her, and the silence was the length of 20 years. Odysseus, who understood her, perhaps the only person who had ever understood her completely, did not push. He waited. He let her be cautious. He bathed and dressed and came back looking more like himself, and still she sat with her arms around her knees and regarded him carefully. Telemachus, impatient, said that his mother had a heart of iron. Odysseus told him to leave her be. Then, almost gently, Penelope gave Eurycleia an instruction. "Take the great bed," she said, "and move it out of the bedroom into the hall. Make it up with good blankets for our guest." And Odysseus's composure, which had survived Cyclopes and storms and the land of the dead, finally broke, not in anger but in a kind of stunned revelation, because he said, "You cannot move that bed. I know you cannot move that bed, because I built that bed. I built it around a living olive tree, the trunk of a great olive tree that grows in the center of our room, and I shaped the wood and laid the straps of hide, and that bed is rooted in the earth, and it does not move. Only you and I and one maid know this. Who has moved my bed?" Penelope's composure dissolved. She crossed the room and put her arms around him and wept, and he held her and wept too. The secret of the bed was her test, the final test, the one thing that no impostor could have known. The tree, the bed, the room where they had always slept. 20 years condensed into a single moment of recognition, and then they were talking and could not stop talking, and the night went on around them as the stars moved overhead. He told her everything, all of it. The years fell between them like water between cupped hands, and yet they caught what they could, and it was enough. And eventually they slept in the great bed rooted in the living olive tree, and the goddess Athene held back the dawn a little out of kindness to give them more night. In the morning, the families of the suitors gathered in the streets, furious. Their sons were dead, their lords were dead, and Odysseus had done it. They armed themselves. Odysseus armed himself and Telemachus and the loyal servants, and went out to meet them on the hillside above the town, and the fighting began. Athene, moving among them in the guise of mentor, an old family friend, watched. Then Athene raised her voice with the authority of the immortal gods and told everyone to stop. "Go home," she said. "This has gone far enough. The blood feud ends here by divine decree, and everyone will be reconciled and peace will be kept." The men on both sides, who had, if they were honest, been terrified from the start, found themselves extraordinarily willing to stop fighting and go home to breakfast, and they did, and they were reconciled, and Ithaca was at peace. And Odysseus went up the hillside to his father's orchard, where old Laertes was bent over his rose in a labourer's tunic, the former king become a gardener of his grief. He told him straight this time, no long testing, no clever deception, just, "I am your son, I am home." Laertes looked at him, and the years fell off him like a shed skin, and he put his hands on his son's shoulders, and he was simply very happy, which is all some endings require. And that is the Odyssey. All 24 books of it, 10 years of wandering, 20 years of absence, all the monsters and witches and gods and sorceresses and kings and sailors and bards and beggars, compressed into this quiet moment. An old man in an orchard, a son come home. The olive trees silver in the light. The sea somewhere below, blue and endless and for now still. Odysseus is home. He is tired beyond the expression of tiredness. He has been a pig and a nobody and a beggar. He has spoken with the dead. He has lost every man he sailed with. He has come back across the wine-dark sea on the strength of nothing but the particular stubbornness of a man who wanted, more than anything else in the world, to sleep in his own bed, next to his own wife on his own island under his own stars. It was enough to get him home. It is enough now to let you sleep. Close your eyes. The sea is far away. The olive trees are silver in the moonlight. The great bed does not move. Ithaca is quiet, and so are you, and there is nothing more tonight that needs doing, nowhere to go, no monster awake, no storm building on the water. Everything difficult is done. The long journey is finished. Sleep now.